Welcome to the pod.
And good afternoon, good morning, good evening, good night, whatever the case may be. Chris Mathis, Spencer Mathis, and TCM Pod getting into the latest out of the NFL, of course, today, as we had a lot that broke over the last couple of days leading up to the last full week in all reality, including Kirk Cousins signing with the Atlanta Falcons on a lucrative 4-year deal, $180 million contract, which was signed on Wednesday, which for me, coming off of a torn ACL, 36 years old, I think was a bit high for a guy like that. He's 35, turning 36 by August 19th. I don't know. I just feel as if we've already seen the best of Kirk Cousins. It was a good sign for the Atlanta Falcons. They move on from Desmond Ridder officially, which they needed to. The guy really did not have anything to offer. If you watch all the so-called highlights last year, the Falcons, they had nothing to do with Desmond Ridder. The guy was off. He would overthrow receivers. He would underthrow receivers. He was terrible in terms of footwork in the pocket. His vision inside the pocket was god-awful. I mean, there was just so many things that held back the Atlanta Falcon football team and that offense, and a lot of that had to do with Arthur Smith and their quarterback play, starting with Desmond Ridder. So first and foremost, Atlanta Falcons have a new quarterback. They're also the favorite in the NFC South. What's up, Spence? How do you feel about all this?
Yeah, it's a good signing for the Atlanta Falcons. They needed a quarterback. Obviously, the league doesn't value a guy like Justin Fields. I think that would have been their next option. And if you're Atlanta sitting with the pick that they have, I don't think you want to risk next season to trade up for a quarterback who hasn't proven it yet. And I don't think if you're sitting at 8 that you're going to get one of the top 4 quarterbacks or top 3 quarterbacks really in this draft. You probably ended up with J.J. McCarthy at pick number 8. So Atlanta, I think, did what they had to do. They had to go out there, sign a veteran quarterback, and the best one available was Kirk Cousins. And it was a good thing for them that they got him. Obviously, $100 million guaranteed, 4 years, $180 million. I think it's a bit much, but again, the quarterback market every single year kind of resets. Guys get paid more than they ever have, and that's kind of how the NFL is trending right now. So I think overall it's a good pickup for the Atlanta Falcons, and in probably 2 or 3 years, as long as they make the playoffs twice out of those 3 next years, I think Atlanta fans are happy with it, and I think the contract would be worth it. Obviously, I don't think Atlanta at this moment next season is ready to compete for a championship, but they are ready to compete for the NFC South, and I think we could see the Atlanta Falcons winning the South next season over the Buccaneers. I think it's going to take 10 wins for whoever does it, but whoever comes in second place, as long as they have 9 wins, should have a wild card game, and it'll be the 3rd time that those 2 teams play in one season next year. Hopefully, it's the Buccaneers versus Falcons in Atlanta or in Tampa Bay for that wild card game in the NFC. I think that'd be a sweet thing to watch. But again, whoever wins the NFC South isn't winning the entire NFC conference. So again, I think there's going to be 2 teams in the NFC next season that come out and headed in the playoffs. It's going to be the Atlanta Falcons and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And I think really it's a toss-up between who's going to win the division, who's going to get second place, because Atlanta on paper, really good. But again, first-year head coach in Raheem Morris hasn't coached in 13, 14 years now in the NFL as the head guy. He's been a good defensive coordinator. Atlanta has a good defense, but they have a couple of issues defensively on that defensive line, and they're going to have to draft well in order to actually be a real contender next season. But as of right now, they've done everything they possibly could. They got Rondale Moore. They signed Darnell Mooney, overpaid him a lot, which is something that I do not justify overpaying a receiver. We saw it in Tampa Bay just 2 years ago with Russell Gage. He's already getting cut. We had to eat 15 to 20 million in dead money over the last 2 years with that guy because he didn't play last season. So never in favor of signing a receiver for that much money, especially if he's not your number one guy. But Kirk Cousins, great signing for Atlanta, and I think he's only going to bring good things to the city of Atlanta.
Again, I appreciate you all for tuning in here on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, whatever the case may be. Make sure to hit follow, subscribe, comment, whatever you want to do in order to support us. We do always open that. You can comment down below or share this podcast as well. And Spence, a lot to talk about regarding Kirk Cousins, and this kind of just hit me as we were literally in the show, but the signing of Kirk Cousins to Atlanta, you look at his 2022 season, which was his last full season, 4,547 yards, 29 passing touchdowns, 14 interceptions. Then Aaron Rodgers, his last full season also in 2022 when he was with the Packers, 3,695 yards, which is quite a few, nearly 1,000 yards less than what Kirk Cousins had in 2022. Also, he had 3 fewer touchdowns, 2 fewer interceptions, and he's 4 years older than Kirk Cousins. Could that signing of Kirk Cousins in Atlanta be a bigger signing than Aaron Rodgers there in New York with the New York Jets?
I think if last season would have played out how it should have, I think it would have been a great year for the New York Jets. Instead, it ended up with Rodgers getting hurt in the first 5 snaps of the year. Now he's going to be the vice president for Robert F. Kennedy. So it's a weird time to be a New York Jet fan. We'll see how that plays out. I think that announcement comes at the end of March for Kennedy, but hopefully Rodgers isn't a part of any presidential candidacy, especially if you're a New York Jets fan. But again, obviously, I think Aaron Rodgers is a much better quarterback even at this age than Kirk Cousins is. But missing last year with Aaron Rodgers, what he did, obviously he's going to age another year. The injury could play into how mobile he is because he's always used his mobility, even up to 2 seasons ago at his old age. He was still a very mobile quarterback. He can get off his spot. But again, he's got a better arm than Kirk Cousins regardless of the injury. And we got to remember that Kirk Cousins is also coming off of a major injury. So I think, in my opinion, the Rodgers injury or the Rodgers signing last season is bigger than Kirk Cousins going to Atlanta whenever it happened. But right now, I guess Kirk Cousins would be the bigger signing unless Cousins goes out there and doesn't complete the full season. Because if you don't get 15 to 17 games out of Cousins this year, it's a failure for Atlanta, at least the first year with that $100 million guaranteed. The Packers losing Aaron Rodgers wasn't a big factor for them. Obviously, the Jets not having Aaron Rodgers was the end of their season, but now they have a pretty good draft pick. They can pick whoever they want early on in the first round. And again, we'll see how that plays out this year for Aaron Rodgers and the New York Jets. But again, as of right now, Kirk Cousins is the bigger signing as long as he stays healthy this year, which is a main concern. And you pointed out the 2022 season for Kirk Cousins, 29 touchdowns, 14 interceptions is not a great season. It's not a great season, especially whenever you have a number one like Justin Jefferson. Obviously, last year he looked pretty good. He had Hawkinson for a little bit, but that's not an amazing season for a quarterback that's 34 years old, late into his career. Obviously, we'll see how long Kirk Cousins can go in the NFL. But again, that injury, I think, is still going to play a huge role. And Atlanta's offensive line last year was trash. So hopefully they can at least address some of those concerns as well and give Kirk Cousins some time in the pocket, because even with the Vikings, the injury happened because his offensive line sucked. Whenever he gets blitzed and he gets under pressure, Kirk Cousins isn't a great quarterback. And we saw that in week 1 last season against the Buccaneers whenever the Bucs went into Minnesota and took down Kirk Cousins and the Minnesota Vikings. If he's under pressure, he's not a great quarterback. So you have to have a really good offensive line with Cousins like he did just 2 years ago. They lost a couple of their big guys heading into last season, and you saw what happened. So Atlanta's really got to address that as well. But Kirk Cousins in Atlanta next year, I think, in all reality, is going to play out well, and they're going to end next year with at least 9 to 10 wins, which is good enough for a playoff spot in the NFC.
Now, obviously, Aaron Rodgers is coming off of that injury you referred to a few moments ago, ruptured his left Achilles tendon 4 snaps into his New York Jets career. And, of course, Kirk Cousins tearing his ACL there with the Vikings early this year. Both of these guys coming off major injuries at their age. Of course, Aaron Rodgers a good bit older than Kirk Cousins. Who do you think has the better season in 2024? Both of them kind of have an interesting situation. They're both older, coming off of key injuries. And even though Aaron Rodgers did go through training camp with the Jets last year, he took just 4 snaps with the Jet football team in a real deal football game. So it's still going to be a new, fresh start for him. It's going to feel like that. I don't know if there's as many pieces in New York as maybe Kirk Cousins has, believe it or not, because of the running back situation. Kyle Pitts, of course, Drake London, who I think that we've yet to see the best of. I'm not saying he's going to be great like they hoped he would be, but I think that Drake London could still have a really good career in the NFL. And, of course, the running back there, Bijan Robinson with the Atlanta Falcons. So I think that maybe the situation might be a better fit heading into early. My expectation, if who's healthy, starts off right away with guys being 100% healthy, Aaron Rodgers and Kirk Cousins week 1. I'm thinking Kirk Cousins might have a better season this year. Would that be far-fetched in my opinion or in your opinion, or do you think I'm way off with that? Because Aaron Rodgers, I just don't also buy into what he has around him necessarily with the Jets. They signed Dalvin Cook last year. That was a flop. It looked like the offense just didn't care. I know they were playing with scrubs at the quarterback position, but ultimately, just all in all, a pitiful offense with the New York Jets last year, even if you took away Aaron Rodgers. And I'm not sure how much of that was just on Zach Wilson, but it was inexcusable in my opinion.
Yeah, Aaron Rodgers, even with this injury, is still one of the most talented quarterbacks of all time. Obviously, the same cannot be said about Kirk Cousins. And I do think Atlanta's situation is much better than the New York Jets next season because of the weapons they have offensively. Their defense was top 10 last season for most of the year. The New York Jets also have a great defense. Altogether, though, Aaron Rodgers, I think, is still going to have a better season. Maybe not in the wins category, but overall, as the quarterback statistics go, Rodgers is typically top 5 in passing touchdowns and top 3 in the least amount of interceptions thrown in a season. So I'm still going to go with Rodgers having the better statistical season, but I think the Atlanta Falcons are going to have a better overall season than the New York Jets. But again, that's only in the regular season. If Aaron Rodgers gets in the playoffs, I think it's just a different thing. At this point in his career, I think he's going to want it a little bit more than he has in the past. All those NFC Championship collapses that he's had with the Green Bay Packers doesn't really transfer over to the New York Jets. They're kind of a young football team overall. So we'll see what the New York Jets do next season with Aaron Rodgers. But if we're looking at just statistics alone, give me Rodgers next season. But again, Kirk Cousins could just go off because Kirk, I mean, if he can actually hit Kyle Pitts, unlike Desmond Ridder couldn't last season, Taylor Heineke couldn't last season, then I think he's going to be very good next year. I think he throws over 30 touchdowns. I do think his turnover numbers are going to sit around 14, though, in terms of interceptions again, behind that offensive line that the Atlanta Falcons have. So I'm going to say Kirk Cousins may end up with a couple more touchdown passes than Aaron Rodgers, but Rodgers is going to have probably 5 to 8 less interceptions than Cousins next season.
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to watch these two guys play it all out. Of course, different divisions, different conferences as well. Kirk Cousins has an easier trajectory, I should say, easier path to lead his team down than Aaron Rodgers does, considering Rodgers is in the AFC. It's a gauntlet not only of teams, but of quarterbacks as well. In the NFC, not so much, and things look pretty easy because at the end of the day, all that the Falcons have to get past in this NFC South, in my opinion, are the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They also have a fresh start with a new offensive coordinator. Of course, they did have a better year last year than the Atlanta Falcons did. However, when you think about it, the Atlanta Falcons were not too far away from winning that NFC South division. A couple of plays away, one big hit by Antoine Winfield Jr. away from being the better of the two teams ultimately and finishing near the top of that division, if not in first place, as the Buccaneers were able to scrape by and do. So I'm not sure if I would be, I'm going to say I'd be more shocked if the Falcons did not make the playoffs than if the Jets did not make the playoffs. I'll make that statement today. I think that the Falcons do have the easier track and the easier course to follow than the Jets do, and I think that has a lot more to do with it than simply just the teams and what they have at quarterback as well.
Yeah, the Jets have to deal with the Miami Dolphins and the Buffalo Bills just in their division alone. So obviously, like you said, it's going to be tougher for them to make the playoffs, but statistics-wise, give me Aaron Rodgers. Next season, though, in terms of how the team performance is, I'm going to take the Atlanta Falcons. I'm saying 9 to 10 wins, and I could easily see them winning the NFC South and the Buccaneers being a wild card team. So it's going to depend on how Atlanta's defense will hold up next year. It's going to depend on how Baker Mayfield, if he can play 2 really good seasons back to back. I think they're probably going to split those 2 games like they normally do per season, where the Bucs will win on the road and somehow Atlanta will win on the road as well. So give me the Atlanta Falcons to have a better season than the New York Jets, which I don't think, like you said, is a far-fetched thing. But Rodgers still will have a better statistical season than Kirk Cousins, as long as he's not running for presidency or vice presidency, I should say, with Kennedy.
And one guy that we are not sure about having a great season, but will compete for maybe some playing time if Russell Wilson does fall through as the quarterback there. Yeah, Russell Wilson as the quarterback of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Russell signed with the Steelers for, I believe, right at or just under $1 million with the Pittsburgh Steelers, which sounds surreal to me. When you think back to Russell Wilson and his success he had in Seattle, feels like forever ago. And last year he wasn't a terrible quarterback with the Broncos. The Broncos just kind of finagled their way away from him and benched him. They gave him an option. Hey, get rid of this clause in your contract, or we're going to bench you. And he chose the get benched route with Sean Payton there and Denver. It was ugly. Russell Wilson stood his ground, which I can't blame him because he signed a contract. Once you sign the dotted lines, that's in the history books. You move on. Hey, what's done has been done. And instead, the Broncos still wanted him to go back and alter that contract, which is crazy because if it were the other way around, hey, Broncos, hey, GM, owner of the team, will you make this change for me? No, it's in the contract, Russell. We can't change that. But they asked him to make changes to his contract, which is honestly a joke. Whether you love Russell Wilson or hate the guy, whatever the case may be. But I went back and I watched some highlights of him, man, back in like 2012, 2013 with the Steelers. The guy was good. He was fun to watch, too. Just to see kind of the aura around him just dissipate over the last couple of seasons. has really been sad. And I know he's a weird guy. He's an oddball. He's not the greatest leader, but he's still a good football player, still a good quarterback. I just think that he's one of those guys that his energy that he gives off and his tackiness, his cheesiness really just pushes teammates away from him because it's just a weird sense of humor that you don't see from not only quarterbacks, but just people in particular, and most of all, and leaders as well.
Yeah, last season in one of I would say the toughest division in football, at least right now, with how big of a tear the Chiefs have been on since Patrick Mahomes has arrived as a starting quarterback with Kansas City. I mean, last season, 26 touchdowns, 8 interceptions for Russell Wilson on a really, really, really bad Denver Broncos team. Obviously, the yards were lacking for him. I think he had just over 3,000. Not great. But again, only 8 total turnovers, throwing interceptions, I think is something that you would take. And I would maybe even be as bold to say, looking at the 2 contract differences between Kirk Cousins and Russell Wilson, I don't know. I think that's a huge difference. That's over $40 million difference between the 2 quarterbacks. And I would take Russell Wilson over Kirk Cousins next season. They're the same age. Cousins is coming off what could be a career-altering injury. If you're the Atlanta Falcons, I bet they were kind of shocked to see that, hey, we could have got this guy for just $1 million. I mean, I think that's an insane steal for the Pittsburgh Steelers. They're a playoff team next season regardless. They always just seem to somehow sneak their way into the playoffs based off of how good their defense has played over the last 10 years or so. And TJ Watt has been a big part of that for the last 6. But again, that's a huge steal for the Pittsburgh Steelers. And I would be interested to compare Russell Wilson's 2023 season to Kirk Cousins' final season in Minnesota as a full-time starter, because I'm sure those numbers aren't very off. And you look at the targets that Russell Wilson was throwing to compared to what Kirk Cousins was throwing to. Russell Wilson was throwing to a disgruntled Jerry Jeudy, who they've now since traded. Cortland Sutton was out before the season even started. So they didn't have a lot of targets, and he played pretty good. I think the narrative around him is just so bad right now. He's easy to make fun of. Like you said, he's kind of got a robot personality. The future thing that he's dealing with his wife is always a funny thing to look back at. People are saying that Justin Fields should immediately head into training camp and bump future on his way into each practice and try and play that during the practices to try and get the starting role and move Russell Wilson out of the starting role that he's kind of already been gifted to with the Pittsburgh Steelers. But again, a great contract for Pittsburgh, and I don't think he's a Pittsburgh type of guy, in terms of steel worker, always doing something, always at work. It's worker football.
Yeah, you know what? Someone once said, and don't forget your thought right there, but someone once said, Russell Wilson said, "Let's ride," and all of Steel City said, "Let's weld." So yeah, that's the rumor.
So yeah, I don't know if he really fits in there, but again, if he can just continue with the 8 interceptions in a season with that defense, they're a 9 to 10 win team, just like the Atlanta Falcons. So
and the coaching too, Mike Tomlin, one of the best in National Football League, if not top 2, top 3.
Yeah. So obviously it's going to work out for the Steelers regardless, because of what we're going to talk about in a little bit with the trade that they just completed yesterday. But again, I think it's a great signing, and whoever would have got Russell Wilson for $1 million is 1,000,000% worth it. In this quarterback market, the only team that's getting screwed over is the Denver Broncos right now. They're screwed for the next 2 to 3, 4 years, maybe even. They've kind of been in rebuild mode since they lost Peyton Manning after that Super Bowl win. So Russell Wilson to Pittsburgh, I think is an amazing signing for that amount of money. I don't think he's a top 10 quarterback in the NFL anymore, but if he can keep those turnovers down, if he can keep the touchdowns up like he's had around 30, I think Russell Wilson's a great signing for whoever could have got him. And luckily, it's the Pittsburgh Steelers who have kind of needed a quarterback for the last 4 or 5 years. Even during Ben Roethlisberger's last 2 seasons, I mean, he was absolute trash. So great signing for Pittsburgh.
Would you rather have Russell Wilson at his contract for the next season or Baker Mayfield at his contract, about $30+ million this year in 2024?
Yeah, if I'm another team, if I'm not the Buccaneers, I would take Russell Wilson all day long over Baker Mayfield. But with how the Buccaneers have built their culture around Mayfield just last season, how everybody loves him, they really could not afford to not be able to re-sign the guy. You can't go from a guy like Baker Mayfield to Russell Wilson. That's bigger. That's a bigger jump, in my opinion, than Tom Brady to Baker Mayfield, because I don't think Russell Wilson's really a leader. Obviously, he was carried in the early part of his career by the Legion of Boom. Obviously, he got better and he became a great quarterback. But look at how Marshawn Lynch talks about him since he's retired. Yeah. Not a lot of players say great words about Russell Wilson, but he's a great quarterback all time, at least throughout his whole career. He's a great quarterback. And I think he's going to play good next year for Pittsburgh because do they really need a leader? I don't think so. They dealt with Kenny Pickett the last 2 years. That's not a huge jump if the guy can't lead either.
Yeah, make a great point there regarding Kenny Pickett and what he had going there in Pittsburgh and the inconsistencies and the fact that he was benched. And I think it says a lot about Kenny Pickett, the player, and where his teammates stand with him as far as if they believe in him or if he thinks the coaching staff or upper management believes in him. When he requested the trade, he wanted out of Pittsburgh once he saw that Russell Wilson sign there. And with that, the Steelers make a trade for Justin Fields of the Chicago Bears, who comes in, and I don't know if it's a quarterback competition. I think it could be one. I would not be shocked if there's at least somewhat of a competition between Fields and Russell Wilson, but I think the expectation is that Russell is the guy. If Russell were to struggle, maybe Fields gets a chance to showcase some of his talents. And I don't want to compare it necessarily to a Baker Mayfield, Kyle Trask competition, quote unquote competition that they had in training camp last year right here in Tampa Bay. Again, I'm at 95.3 WDAE iHeartRadio studios recording this podcast, if you did not know. But there are a lot of question marks regarding that situation. I think when you look at Fields and his track record, it's not what Baker Mayfield's track record was. And it's damn sure not what Russell Wilson's track record was and his resume has been so far throughout his NFL playing career. So I don't know if there's a competition there, but I do think that if there is some inconsistencies or if they're not winning games, forget about Russell Wilson's leadership capabilities or lack thereof. They would move on from Russell because it's only a $1 million investment for 1 year.
Yeah, obviously the quarterback competition between Kenny Pickett and Russell Wilson would have been a lot tougher. So They always say, bet on yourself. Kenny Pickett said, hell no, I want to be out of here. Send me somewhere where I don't even have a chance to be a starter. So I think that's kind of a wild thing for Pickett to do because guess what? In Philadelphia, he's the number 2 quarterback, and he accepted that trade to go to the Philadelphia Eagles. The player has the right to say no. Kenny Pickett said, yes, I'd much rather be a backup behind Jalen Hurts than have to compete against a guy like Russell Wilson. So to me, that tells me that Kenny Pickett obviously doesn't bet on himself. He doesn't think he's a good quarterback. And I think it doesn't look well. It doesn't look good on him heading into the rest of his NFL career. But going to the Justin Fields thing with the going from the Chicago Bears now to his new squad with the Pittsburgh Steelers, I thought that was completely out of left field. A wild thing for the Steelers to do immediately after signing Russell Wilson. But again, I think look back at how Russell Wilson used to play. He was a pretty good scrambling quarterback. I think Russell Wilson right now is probably the best mentor for a guy like Justin Fields at this point in his career.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. I think that also Russell Wilson knows where he's at. And as far as knowing that he has to prove himself, Russell Wilson should have a really good season. I just saw some news regarding Justin Fields that we're speaking of and teams that were actually interested in Justin Fields. At least 4 additional teams inquired about trading for Justin Fields, but Justin Fields' agency asked for him not to be traded to those other 4 teams. He wanted the Steelers, and the Bears actually sent him off to his wish to the Steelers. So even though he's no longer in Chicago, he got his wish. There were 5 teams that were seriously reaching out to trade for him. He said, I don't want to go to these 4. He wants to go to Pittsburgh. They did him right there. So, and who wouldn't want to go play for Mike Tomlin? The guy's one hell of a coach. And I think that he'll be able to figure things out there because there isn't that much pressure. And there's more pressure, in my opinion, on Russell Wilson than Justin Fields heading into this 2024 season. So that can definitely benefit a young quarterback who has not had success in the NFL in terms of winning football games, which ultimately I don't think that wins and losses are necessarily a quarterback stat. Yes, they have a bit to do with it, but it's just like when a quarterback dominates, he gets too much praise. And when the team struggles, he gets very little praise. So, or he gets all of the disbelief, discredit. So there's just so much on a quarterback's shoulder. I think that this is the perfect situation for Russell Wilson. Another interesting situation was Desmond Ridder's trade. Actually, before we get into Ridder, the other side of that trade for Fields to Pittsburgh was, of course, Kenny Pickett getting traded to the Philadelphia Eagles. The Eagles get a 4th-round draft pick in 2024, and Kenny Pickett for the Steelers receiving a 3rd-round draft pick this year, a 7th in 2025, and an additional 7th in 2025. So 2 7th-round draft picks next draft for the Steelers. So looking at it on paper, I'm going to go with the Steelers winning this trade because they get rid of this guy. They also get Justin Fields into the mix, and they have Russell Wilson at quarterback, which no matter who they go there, I would rather have Fields and or Russell Wilson, much less both, over Kenny Pickett. the Steelers get a third-round draft pick, which is a win there, a seventh-round draft pick, two of them actually in 2025. So bye-bye Kenny Pickett, who I feel as if the entire team, the entire organization, and the fan base had given up on. Kenny Pickett, fresh start, sitting behind Jalen Hurts. And in all reality, Jalen Hurts, he won't lose his job to Kenny Pickett, but it's not like he had a very good season last year. And you take away that Super Bowl run, I don't think he gets that contract that we saw him get inked just a short while ago there in Philadelphia.
Yeah, like you said, I think the Steelers won the trade, especially after the signings that they got. They got Russell Wilson. They traded for Justin Fields. Altogether, you get I think a cancer out of the quarterback room. If he's a backup quarterback, obviously they wanted to trade him immediately after they found out, after Pickett found out that Russell Wilson was coming in. He was a disgruntled employee, so they sent him off. They ended up getting a pretty good pick for him, a third-round pick, and all they had to ship out was Kenny Pickett and a fourth-rounder. I think you'll take that every day of the week if you're Pittsburgh, trying to kind of get in a completely different quarterback room than what they've had the last couple of years with Trubisky and Kenny Pickett. So great trade for the Steelers. And then looking at the Bears traded away Justin Fields for a bag of chips. Obviously, they were done with him. And
hopefully they release like those barbecue twist ones, those Fritos, I think. Those are good.
I don't think so. A fifth-round pick next season, I believe, or a sixth-round pick next season that could turn into a fourth-round pick if he gets enough playing time, which he will not. So obviously, they wanted to be done with Justin Fields. The fan base was kind of, I wouldn't say half and half. I'd say 30-70. 30% wanted to keep Justin Fields. 70% were ready to move on. But go back and look at last year. Last year, obviously, for Justin Fields was, hey, we're going to keep you, and we're going to trade away our first-round pick to the Carolina Panthers. We're going to bet on you this year. If you don't do good, you're gone next year. I think that was the rule all along. That was kind of the bet that they made on Justin Fields. Guess what? He sucked it up again last season. I don't care what the Bears team looked like. He's got talent as a runner. He's got talent if they can build him. But in Chicago, not the right fit. They bet on him. He didn't give them any money back. All they did was have to ship him away, and now he's gone. So he's in a better situation for himself. The Bears were ready to move on. They're probably going to have Caleb Williams next season, maybe Jaden Daniels, depending on how the draft board looks in a couple of weeks whenever we actually get to hear what's actually going on in the NFL. But again, you get rid of the quarterback you didn't want. Now you get a quarterback that you do want and that everybody's on board with. So for the Bears, good thing. For the Steelers, great thing. And I think Justin Fields kind of failed in the season that they always deem as the boomer bust. And last year was Justin Fields' boomer bust, because now you're a backup for at least a year. You're not going to start.
You don't think he's going to start? You don't think? Really? Wow. I was just going to ask you if you felt as if maybe Russell Wilson would not start as many games as Justin Fields at some point. But you're right. I think that Tomlin is going to be with the veteran, with the guy that's won games, with the guy that's won big games. He's been there, done that, and they just need their defense to do their thing and take care of the football. Kenny Pickett could not do that. Kenny Pickett could not make those big throws last year, and that obviously faltered their offense and slowed down what they were able to accomplish and caused their offensive coordinator, who I'm not saying was any good, but to get fired midway through the season, which was tough. And they still found a way to win 10 games last year? I don't know how they did it. Yeah, Russell Wilson is definitely an improvement there at quarterback for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Desmond Ridder goes off to Arizona for a player trade for Rondale Moore, wide receiver, getting sent to Atlanta to team up with Kirk Cousins. So I don't really have too many thoughts on this trade. I'm not sure who would want to trade for a guy like Desmond Ridder, especially whenever you have a quarterback that's not very stable in terms of being healthy year-round, that being Kyler Murray. The guy just can't stay healthy, in my opinion. You're going to rely on Desmond Ridder. You're banking on him not only being the backup, but potentially playing football games in 2024 because Kyler Murray just can't stay healthy. And I know a lot of that isn't necessarily his fault. It has to do with the offensive line and the lack of a run game, but still concerning because you're turning the keys over when he's done to Desmond Ridder. I would rather have had like a Joe Flacco sit on my bench and push and maybe even mentor Kyler Murray a bit more.
Yeah. I think this is a situation with the Falcons where they're like, all right, F it, we're done with this guy. We saw how he did last year. He put together what I like to call a mini Jameis Winston season, 12 touchdowns, 12 interceptions, but a ton of fumbles, and 4 of them against the Buccaneers in 2 games. So in my opinion, obviously he didn't lose all of them, but he had 4 in 2 games against Tampa Bay. So if you're Atlanta, let's trade this guy for a guy who has been a failure in his career so far, Rondale Moore. but he's got a ton of speed. And he's a good Madden Ultimate Team player. So we'll take him over this guy. We can build some Atlanta Falcon theme teams heading into next season. We got some speed on the receiving core, kind of like what they added with Darnell Mooney. Right now, the Atlanta Falcons roster with the veteran quarterback that they have is looking very similar to the 2016 Atlanta Falcons roster in the year they went to the Super Bowl and they lost to the New England Patriots in the biggest collapse in sports history. 28-3 was how much the Falcons were up. In case you guys haven't heard about this, Falcons were up 28-3 at halftime to Tom Brady in the third quarter, actually, with about 2 minutes to go. And Tom Brady came back and won. If you've been living up under a rock, you haven't heard that story. But again, they signed Taylor Gabriel that season. He was a baller that year. They had Mohamed Sanu as well. He was a baller that year. Adding these two receivers and having a guy like Drake London makes the Falcons offense on paper right now top 10. I think it's a top 10 offense in the NFL if they can all do what they're supposed to do. And if the Atlanta Falcons defense can be good, they're going to be great. But again, those two guys, I think Rondale Moore was done with the Arizona Cardinals. His best season, I think, is 400 yards. Desmond Ridder, you kind of saw how he played. As soon as you were drafted, whenever they zoomed into him on draft day a couple of years ago, you said, is that who the Falcons just drafted, or is that his father? Is that a 40-year-old man? He looks so old. And as soon as I saw him, I was like, all right, is this the guy for Atlanta? He's not the face of Atlanta, and right now he's out of Atlanta. So Ridder was a failure for Atlanta. Rondale Moore has not lived up to his potential, so why not swap him? And again, like I said, Kyler Murray, the injury issues. I think this was a very good, even player trade. I can't remember the last time I've seen a straight-up player trade for guys that were starters last season. Usually it involves a draft pick, but good trade for both sides. I think Atlanta needed another receiver as the number 4 guy, maybe the number 3 guy, depending on how it pans out. And the Cardinals needed a backup because they lost the Pasternaut after, 4 games last season as their starter. So Josh Dobbs was out. They had that rookie quarterback start who was absolute cheap. You have Kyler Murray, who's can't see over the line, and he always seems to get injured. So, again, you're still thinking maybe Ridder has an NFL career in him, maybe something in him. I don't think so, but the Arizona Cardinals did, and they got him by shipping out Rondale Moore. So, good trade for both teams, in my opinion.
I think Rondale Moore has a higher ceiling than a guy in Desmond Ridder, no doubt about it. Former second-round draft pick, only 23 years old. I know Desmond Ridder's young too, but I've seen enough on field, on tape from Desmond Ridder at the quarterback position, which is so obvious. You can really dictate how good a quarterback is a lot easier, a lot quicker than you can with a wide receiver, in my opinion. And also a fresh start. Desmond Ridder is going into Arizona knowing he's the backup, knowing there's no pressure on him, and knowing he was a disappointment in Atlanta. Whereas Rondale Moore is going to Atlanta. He's excited for a fresh start. And honestly, Atlanta, the city, as a professional player, professional athlete, would be cool. There's so much hype around rappers being there. There's so much pop culture. The Atlanta Hawks are a big hit. The Braves are a good baseball team. I'm not a huge fan of Atlanta, the city itself, but the environment and kind of what's surrounded it, especially
if you're rich, it's really cool.
What's that?
You're saying if you're rich, it's a really cool city.
Absolutely.
If you're not, make sure you know where you're at.
Yeah, and obviously I think a lot of it has to do with kind of the pop culture too, and the rappers and Ludacris and Usher, all of those guys, 2 Chainz, go hang out with whoever. But aside from that, when you look at Rondale Moore, he's coming to Atlanta, which, again, a cool spot, especially for pro athlete. But Kirk Cousins, a proven winner, is my quarterback now. And a lot of players don't buy into Kyler Murray. A lot of receivers, you can just tell there's no confidence there.
No.
The connection's not been there. He's been a quarterback in the NFL, starting quarterback for several years now. We know what we have in Kyler Murray. Now you're playing with Kirk Cousins, a fresh start, and also knowing that you don't have to be the number 1 guy there. And Rondale Moore, he's still young. I think it was a good trade on paper, player for player. However, I think that the Cardinals and their trade is going to be more of a downfall in the next year or so. When you look at it, I think Rondale Moore in Atlanta will pan out. As we wrap up the podcast, again, Chris Mathis, Spencer Mathis, make sure to hit that comment button down below. Hit subscribe. One thing that I do think is going under the radar, and I know some are addressing it, but a lot are not, is the job that Jason Light and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers have done this offseason. They franchise tagged Antoine Winfield Jr. They were able to re-sign Mike Evans to a 2-year deal, who was balling. Obviously, he was venturing out to look at other teams, decided to stay put here in Tampa Bay, and other teams would have wanted him. I think that if Mike Evans did not have a Super Bowl ring, he's signing with a team like the Kansas City Chiefs, because write it down, they would win the Super Bowl the next year, right? It guaranteed they would win it. They don't even need Mike Evans, but you add Mike Evans to the mix, they would win it. Fortunately, he had that ring. He stayed put here in Tampa Bay. Mike Evans, Baker Mayfield re-signs. I still think that was a friendly deal because I'm confident another team would have paid Baker Mayfield a little bit more money per season to be the starting quarterback, but he loved Tampa. The Buccaneers also bring back Levante David on a one-year deal. Levante did get a bump in pay, though, from last year. And allegedly, and T-Kraz at 95.3 WDAE said that he heard from a very reliable source that the 49ers were interested. There were talks between at least Levante David's agent trying to get more money. They used that as leverage for Levante to get more money to make about $9 million in 2024 for an older linebacker. Not bad whatsoever. And then, in addition to that, you lose a guy and Devin White, who's no longer there, who I think was a problem, a distraction for this Buccaneer football team. And the Buccaneers make a trade for a former player, I should say, make a signing for a former player in Jordan Whitehead, who is a really good safety that all Buccaneers were upset about when he left Tampa because they couldn't agree to a contract, and he decided to get signed with the New York Jets. So a win is a win is a win. Jason Light and the Buccaneers look really good right now. And again, in a subpar NFC South division, it really helps.
Yeah, and they look good in a way, like you can look in the future and be like, hey, we're not sacrificing the future if this doesn't pan out because all these players are proven. They've all been great. Whitehead was really good with the New York Jets. So that kind of tells me something about New York and the Jets, that he didn't want to stay there heading into next season, even with Aaron Rodgers. He comes back to Tampa. Again, Levante David as well. Mayfield was a huge re-sign for the Buccaneers. And Mike Evans was obviously was the second biggest, maybe even tied for the biggest and the most important of the Buccaneer free agencies. So a great masterclass by Jason Light once again. And the Buccaneers, if you're looking into next season, they got to re-sign Wirfs. They can do that now because you sent Mike Evans. You have him for the next 2 years. You're set. You're good there. Mayfield's on a contract for the next 2 years after this season as well. So everybody's all shirred up. Levante David's going to retire. Antoine Winfield will need to be re-signed, but those are the two you got to worry about. And that's
or retire as a Buccaneer yet in the future.
And again, I'm giving the Buccaneers an A+ only because they've kept everybody they needed to keep, and they added one more. Atlanta Falcons are an A-, but only not getting that plus because if shit hits the fan, Atlanta is screwed for the next 3 or 4 years because this is the rebuild, and they chose to do it. They chose to do the rebuild in a way of hey, we're going to get veteran guys, which is a tough thing to do. The Buccaneers did it a couple of years ago, but they kept from within. The Falcons are trying that right now. It worked out for Tampa Bay. Let's see if it works out for Atlanta. Right now, I think the Buccaneers and the Falcons are top 2 or top 3 in terms of how good they're doing in free agency. And I think, obviously, as a Bucs fan, you don't want to see Atlanta do good, but they've done great in this free agency, and I think they're going to do good next season. But if it doesn't go well, if things go awry, they've got a lot of dead money, and they kind of look like the Denver Broncos if Kirk Cousins doesn't pan out. So, again, right now it looks great. Right now the Buccaneers are set, though, and I think that they have won free agency up to this point.
Really, out of all teams in the NFL, you think that they've done the best job?
I think so because they're a playoff team last season. They've added one more guy. I think they're going to be at least the same spot as they were last season, if not better. I think Baker Mayfield's going to have a very similar season to last year. And the Buccaneers receiving core is good. Buccaneers defense is really good. And it comes down to, again, I think it really comes down to the head coach, which not a lot of teams it comes down to the head coach. But with Tampa, if you watch the Buccaneers, really does come down to Todd Bowles and his time management half the time. So the Bucs on paper look really good. The Atlanta Falcons on paper look really good. But I think the Buccaneers roster is a little bit more stable than what the Falcons have.
Wow. Okay. So what about the Houston Texans? I know they made an addition of signing Joe Mixon. I think that he hasn't been great. He can't stay healthy. They added Danielle Hunter there, though, and that already helps out a very significant and very touted defense with D'Amico Ryans and, of course, Will Anderson Jr. on the other side. How do you feel about that? Do they compete with the Buccaneers, or the Buccaneers still edge out the Texans?
Yeah, I think the Buccaneers still edge out the Texans there. I think in my mind, I had it made up that whoever gets Mike Evans is winning free agency. I think it was the Houston Texans #1, though, in my opinion. If Houston would have got Mike Evans as well, they would be the free agency winners. Instead, the Atlanta Falcons get Kirk changed. The Buccaneers keep everybody and add a great top 10 safety in Jordan Whitehead, who even his ball hawk numbers are pretty good. He had 4 interceptions last season. He was like #2 on the ball hawk rating by PFF that they put out a couple of days ago. Antoine Winfield was #3. So that's one of the best safety pairings in the NFL right there. Mm-hmm. Plus you keep everybody that's already good. So give me the Buccaneers and the Atlanta Falcons 1A, 1B. Now that I'm really thinking about it in this free agency. And I think a lot of people would agree. There's got to be another team better than the Houston Texans. But again, I think it would really just be the Atlanta Falcons in the major competition for the for the best free agency class this season.
Yeah, I'm looking here. An article put up by CBS. Los Angeles Rams, they consider to be one of the top 5 winners. I can't do that now because they lost Aaron Donald. I believe that this article was put up just before that happened. Cleveland Browns signing Jerry Jeudy, retaining Zadarius Smith, Shelby Harris. Also added Jim Schwartz's favorite, Jordan Hicks, as well. And Jameis also adds some flavor. Get it because he's a New Orleans guy, and they have some incredible foods out there. But now Jameis Winston and Deshaun Watson in the same quarterback room. Danger. I'll let you guys have your own words there. I think that's very interesting. You can share your own thoughts. Comment down below. I don't want to get into that, but yeah. Now, Jameis, I think and I hope it seems to be that he's a changed man. That guy, unintentionally hilarious, man. He might be the funniest guy in all of the NFL, truly.
Yeah, he said
unintentionally. He's not trying to be funny. Just what he does is funny.
Winston said it. He said, I had a starting opportunity, but it was my calling to go down there in Cleveland and hit up all the strip clubs with Deshaun Watson.
No, he did. Get out. All right, that is going to do it for TCM Pod. Chris Mathis, Spencer Mathis. Go follow, subscribe, comment down below, hit like on this video, and we will always comment back to you guys with our feedback. We'll be back next week.